But first, last night I said that Labor leader Anthony Albanese was on death watch. And today's frontbench reshuffle shows me that even he knows he's in trouble. Now, take it from me, having lived through the 8 years of the Coalition's last stint in opposition, the only time for a leader to have a reshuffle is right after an election from a position of comparative strength or so close to an election that it's too late for the losers to retaliate. Reshuffles from a position of weakness nearly always make a bad situation worse. The winners aren't grateful, and the losers become instant enemies for life. Advisors and commentators will claim that reshuffles are a circuit breaker. But that's only if there are some obviously spent forces that you're shuffling out of the way and into retirement to make way for some obvious rising stars. In this case, Albanese has just moved around the same old faces, most of whom have been tried and failed before and who need a change of attitude rather than a change of title. Today, this was telling.
This is the strongest team to form an Albanese Labor government. I'm interested, not so much in being in opposition on what titles people have. I'm interested in getting rid of the one word that's the bad word from the titles of the people I'm about to inform you. And that one really bad word is shadow. I want to remove that, and I want to move us to the corridor down the end of this building.
Now, the strategist in me says a line like that is toxic to voters because it highlights that it's all about the spoils of office and occupancy of Parliament House real estate rather than mums and dads who pay the taxes to keep pollies flying around the country and in their chauffeured cars. Indeed, the fact that this reshuffle is happening at the start of the year, days out from the return of Parliament, and not at the end of last year, shows how much Albanese's position has deteriorated over the summer break. Move the players around all they like. Labor's problem is its policies more than its personnel. You can talk about jobs and more jobs, but you've got to have the policies to deliver them. And that's where Labor is deeply split between the climate and identity-obsessed leadership and a voter base that's far more concerned with bread and butter issues. As I said last night, the Libs too have a progressive versus conservative split, but Scott Morrison can talk a conservative game in a way that Anthony Albanese can't and never will. Moving leftist warrior Mark Butler out of the climate portfolio won't help Albanese reconnect with working class voters who want to keep their jobs safe and their cost of living low, especially when he's insistent that the policy hasn't changed. Now, to win back the lost tradies, he needs to ditch the whole climate emergency mindset, which has dominated Labor policy for 2 decades now. And sure, Labor voters in outer metropolitan and regional seats, they don't want to see the environment trashed, but no one does. But more than kowtowing to the UN and elsewhere, they're interested in jobs in their communities rather than emissions. And they're more interested in services and their kids learning the basics properly at school than gender fluidity. This is the fundamental disconnect that no potential Labor leader seems prepared to span. Reshuffle notwithstanding, former Deputy Tanya Plibersek is plainly making a run to be leader. She even published a manifesto of sorts in today's Australian newspaper, but apart from motherhood aspirations, it was more of the leftist delusion that windmills and solar farms can replace blue-collar jobs. She wants, and I quote, full employment, decent wages, job security, dignity in retirement, a strong safety net and a better quality of life for all Australians. Well, earth to Tanya, who doesn't want that? Yet her only policy to achieve this, drum roll, more renewable energy to bring down power bills and boost manufacturing jobs. It shows yet again, doesn't it? Labor does not get it. Although, in a sign of how much Plibersek is spooking Albanese, when asked about her increased media efforts today, rather than congratulate his frontbench colleague for getting out there and prosecuting the case, Well, the Labor leader immediately moved to defend his own efforts.
I looked at Tanya's comments today. Have a look at my speech. It's available to all of you in this room a year ago. I spoke about Curtin and Chifley and national reconstruction, and that's what we should look at in terms of the post-pandemic recovery. This bloke here has got the job of looking after employment and that sort of activity, along with Ed Husick and our economic team led by Jim Chalmers. It's just perfectly consistent. I've got no problem at all with members of the Labor Party putting forward the views which we all hold.
Bit of a glass jaw there. And of course, Chris Bowen, Labor's new climate and energy spokesman, who's also waiting in the leadership wings. Now, unlike Plibersek, Bowen is from the Labor right, so that makes him dangerous, on paper at least. But why would anyone with any political nous think that Bowen's leadership material, given he was a shadow treasurer who told retirees not to vote Labor at the last election, who wanted to rip into their modest nest eggs, and who will, and I'll never let anyone forget this. Bowen was the immigration minister who so spectacularly failed us on the borders under Julia Gillard. Over 24,000 illegal arrivals on his watch, 398 boats, all owned by Chris Bowen, the worst ever result for any minister. And now he's the man Albanese thinks can talk sense on energy and climate policy. I mean, the only Labor figure who talks sense here is the bloke on the outer, the former frontbencher who quit late last year, the member for Hunter, Joel Fitzgibbon. He's made the point that selling cleaner Australian coal is good for the environment and for living standards here and elsewhere, and that blaming and demonising Australian miners for climate change is not just silly, but insulting and unfair. And rather than bleat away on Q&A, he's published all of that in the paper that's read widely in Sydney's Western Suburbs Daily Telegraph. So at least Fitzgibbon knows who they need to get back on Labor's team, and he's talking to them. Now, to me, Fitzgibbon is only one of a handful who could give Scott Morrison a run for his money. But he's not even on the front bench, let alone leader. And even if Labor was to give him a job, well, they'd never let him have his way. And that says it all, doesn't it? Because if the product is lousy, not even the best salesman can sell it. And therein lies a dilemma, isn't it, for our country? A rather timid government that needs to reassert fundamental coalition values and get things done, not just promise them, versus a totally wrong-headed opposition. Sometimes as a country, I feel we're just managing our decline. And on this, at least, I hope I'm wrong.